and the earth. He made light for the sky. He made the sea and the rich dirt. The sun, the moon, the stars, the plants and the trees, the fish, birds, and land beasts, he made all of these. But the crown jewel of God's work was the creation of man, and God placed a woman by his side to stand. A lush green garden and the freedom to choose were the gifts from the Maker, too precious to lose. The humans were to walk with their God each day and carry out his purposes in every form and way. Just one simple rule from God was to be understood. Do not eat from the tree of knowledge of evil and good. Then along came the serpent, tempting the young man and girl. A bite of forbidden fruit, and evil entered God's world. From the garden paradise, Adam and Eve were forced to depart, but God did not desert them, for they were still dear to his heart. Turn around. Wrong. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Okay, all exit, please. The people grew in number as time went on, and the great evils they committed caused God to groan. Yet even in those bad times, God saw one righteous man. His name was Noah, and he would carry out God's plan. The world would be destroyed to get sin under control. Build a great ark for your family, Noah was told, for soon the earth will be ravaged by a deadly flood to get rid of wickedness and return my creation to good. So Noah did as God had commanded him to do. He marched all living creatures into the ark, 2 by 2. And when the time had come, his sons entered with their wives. Then a flood covered the land, and all others lost their lives. When the waters had receded and the ark rested on dry ground, God told Noah to come out and have a look around. And then Noah thanked God for sparing his beloved family, and then erected an altar to show his love and loyalty. Afterwards, there appeared in the sky a beautiful rainbow. It was God's sign to let all of his people know that never by flood would the world be taken again. A very colorful reminder of God's great love for man. After a while, people again covered the earth anew, living in many lands, some faithful, but only a few. God chose a man named Abraham from amongst all of these, for he prayed to God often, head bowed and on his knees.
This happens to me all the time. I have such appreciation for this. Oh, you messed it up.
Oh well, our props are mixed up, so. Okay, where was it? Okay. God gave to Abraham vast lands, descendants, and material things, even the promise that his lineage would someday produce kings. Abraham, in obedience and faith, pledged to God his very best, and through him all nations of the world would be blessed. Soon Abraham begot Isaac, who begot Jacob. Then came Joseph, Jacob's beloved son. Now, Coach. One of many siblings, he was his father's favorite one. Driven by extreme jealousy and just plain irritation, the brothers sold Joseph into slavery to the Egyptian nation. Under God's watchful eye, though, Joseph rose to become Pharaoh's right-hand man. Somebody take the coat off of him. Okay. Under God's watchful eye, Joseph rose to become Pharaoh's right-hand man, just at a time when a great famine threatened the land. Having stored up plenty of grain, Joseph provided his family with food. Here God had taken evil and turned it into good. To reward Joseph for his foresight and devotion, Pharaoh brought the nation of Israel to live in the land of Goshen. And there they multiplied and prospered for generations to come, until a later Pharaoh enslaved them and took back their home. Okay, Joseph exits. Joseph exits. 400 long years of cruel, oppressed lives. Would the God of Israel ever answer their cries? Hearing their pleas, God sent Moses to deal with old Pharaoh. And Moses commanded in God's own words, "Let my people go." It took 10 brutal plagues before Pharaoh finally relented and gave in and sent the Hebrew people away. No more bondage, free again. So out of Egypt, Moses led them across the Red Sea under God's loving protection throughout the desert journey. For 40 long years, the people grumbled and complained. What will we eat or drink in this wilderness terrain? But God knew their needs and supplied water, manna, and quail. Then he gave them his laws so that they could prosper and live well. Finally, after all the wilderness wanderings that they had survived, the long-awaited day of hope and renewal arrived. For after Moses' death, Israel joyfully entered the promised land, with Joshua leading them, a God-serving, faithful man. That's next. Okay, y'all exit. Okay. Now, Larkin. As years passed, God sent judges to lead and supervise, for every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Good leaders like Gideon, Deborah, Samson, and Ehud tried to call the people back to God as best they could. Soon Israel began to clamor for a king of her own, but God was supposed to be the only one on that throne. Nevertheless, God appointed Saul as the first ruler of the nation. Then David's reign brought great wealth, power, and jubilation. The 12 tribes, now united, all fared well for a while, until Solomon's oppression filled their hearts with great guile. Sadly, the kingdom split into the south and the north, and the divided nations of Israel and Judah then issued forth. A succession of good kings with poor kings with a good one from time to time allowed idolatry to creep in, and the nations began to decline. Prophets warned the people only Yahweh to be true. Jeremiah, Isaiah, Hosea, Elijah, just to name a few. Soon Israel fell, followed by Judah, both taken into captivity to Assyria and Babylon to live years of exiled misery. It was not until benevolent Cyrus of Persia took the throne that a faithful remnant was allowed to return home. Jerusalem was rebuilt. And the surrounding walls repaired. Then the temple, but not as grand as before, they all despaired. Ezra led his people in a sweeping spiritual reform, and the new, smaller nation of Israel was soon reborn. Okay, everybody can exit. Along came the Greeks, then the Romans. Oh, how they were hated. And Israel again lived under oppression, so ill-fated. For 400 years it seemed God had forgotten his world, but soon his master plan for mankind would unfurl. And that ends the Old Testament. We're about to start the good news now. When all had been prepared and the time was just right, God chose to enter history and sent the world a guiding light. A tiny baby conceived by a young virgin girl was born in the land, God's only begotten Son in the form of a man. He was birthed in a lowly manger in Bethlehem town, for at census time no room at the inn could be found. A bright star and an angel chorus heralded the miracle on that day, and watchful shepherds came to where the long-awaited Messiah lay. His name was Jesus, and he grew up much like me and you, raised and taught to respect the law as the first-century Palestinian Jew. As a young boy, he traveled to Jerusalem, and to everyone's surprise, his knowledge amazed even the most learned temple rabbis. When at his baptism, he was empowered by the descending dove. It was now clearly the time to begin his ministry of love. By the Sea of Galilee, he chose 12 very ordinary men to help him convince the people to repent of their sin. Jesus taught his disciples using parables while traveling about, and showed compassionate love, especially to those down and out. He performed miracles like walking